I would like to say a warm welcome on behalf of Columbia Global Centers Istanbul and ELIAMEP. My name is Ipek Taha. I'm the director of Columbia Global Centers Istanbul. Today we'll be discussing a very timely topic, the topic of the Eastern Mediterranean and rethinking the Eastern Mediterranean from a diplomacy, energy, and sustainability perspective. Today, we are going to be discussing, as well as the energy diplomacy, we're also going to be obviously discussing the hydrocarbon resources in the region. Even though in the past couple of months, when we use the term East Med, it always started to bring to our minds conflict and security issues and escalation. We would like to look at it from a wider perspective and a longer term perspective today with our esteemed speakers. I will be opening the panel, and it will be followed by the moderation of the panel will be done by Ioannis Grigoriadis. Thank you, Ioannis, for that. And I wanted to introduce briefly our three panelists. Firstly, it will be Sinan Ülgen. You might know Sinan. He's a political commentator. You might be reading him. You might be hearing him on Turkish and international topics. He's a visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe in Brussels, where his research focuses on Turkish policy, nuclear policy, cyber policy, and transatlantic relations. In addition, he is also the chairman of the Istanbul-based think tank Center for Economic and Foreign Policy Studies, EDAM. Charles Ellinas, thank you, Charles, also for joining us, has over 35 years of experience in the oil and gas industry in senior management positions. Currently, he is the CEO of ECNHC, and that's EC Cyprus Natural Hydrocarbons Company, providing management and advisory services in the oil, gas, and energy sectors in Cyprus and the region. He's a senior associate at the Atlantic Council as well. Deger Saygın, thank you, Deger, for joining us, is the director of the SHURA Energy Transition Center. In his former role at the International Renewable Energy Agency, Saygın has developed and led the Global Renewable Energy Roadmap program between 2013 and 2017. This program has assisted the world's largest energy-using countries, 70 countries, in accelerating the use of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies to operationalize the goals of the 7th Sustainable Development Goal and the Paris Agreement. So just a quick reminder for our audience, please, you can direct your questions starting with the beginning of the panel in the Q&A box. And I would like to start the panel, Sinan, open it up with you. In a recent article you have published on the issue, you position energy as a critical component of international relations with a potential of cooperation between nations, as well as a source for conflict and diplomacy. Could you please put the East Med issue for us in context and provide some background on the escalation of the tensions in the region, and also expand on what we can expect over the short and long term? Thank you.
Thank you, Ipek. Always a pleasure to be here and see old friends and new friends. In the past few months, I think I've seen Ioannis Grigoriadis, more often than some of my family members. We've had the pleasure, to talk about these issues since the beginning of the crisis. So good to see you, particularly Ioannis. Now, just to be able to say a few intelligent things about your interesting question, Ipek. I think broadly, when we looked at energy, we were hopeful that this nexus would actually provide a positive impetus for peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, I refer to the initial discussions when some of these, offshore resources were found. And there were, a host of analysis pointing that this could actually be a peace dividend for Cyprus. That because the different parties on the island could, essentially understand that they really need a political settlement in order to be able to, fully benefit, leverage these offshore resources. And therefore that this finding could actually lead to an accelerated political settlement on the island. Those were the good old days. Unfortunately, what we have experienced was a different direction of travel. So energy, potentially, I still think that it can have a very valuable role to play in reaching a political settlement, in the whole stability and prosperity of the Eastern Med, at least the eastern part of Eastern Med, and I'm talking about more particularly Cyprus. But in practice, energy has played a rather divisive role and further deepened the cleavages on the island. Because we haven't been able to find a solution for a fair distribution of the revenues. Then, of course, issues regarding, the political divide, the sovereignty on the island also got compounded as the stakes, became higher with these findings. Because before, the political settlement was essentially about, how do you share national sovereignty? But now you also have added to that the economic dimension of the offshore energy, where sovereignty comes with the right to benefit from the commercialization of these resources. So in a way, it has further complicated the dilemma facing the Cypriots. However, I still am hopeful that energy could actually become a positive influence. Because, and here there certainly are people who are much better versed than me to assess the situation, but it seems to me that still with everything, and of course with the global direction, pressure on hydrocarbon prices, still the most feasible route for these offshore gas to reach European markets is by way of a pipeline to and from Turkey. And that will require a political solution given where Cyprus is. Now, moving a bit west, on the part where the main issue is between Turkey and Greece, about the division of the maritime borders, the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone, I think it is worth mentioning that these divisions are not new. They're actually very old. And nothing really has changed in terms of how the governments have positioned themselves. The positions themselves have not changed. What has changed is, again, the energy part of this equation. Because before, these findings, the offshore findings, the divisions were related purely about, national sovereignty, namely, how much sovereignty do you have, offshore, how do you divide that area of sovereignty? And the discussion was a bit theoretical because, economic exclusive zones would mean something in practice if there is something that you can commercially leverage there. Otherwise, it's just about basically fish. And, but so the main why the situation has become more complicated in recent years in the East Med is related to, offshore gas findings. We haven't found anything, I think, of substance yet in the area that is now seen to be a contested area between Turkey and Greece, in the Eastern Med. Unlike the part of the Eastern Med, near in the exclusive waters of Israel, Cyprus or Egypt, where there are findings, but in the contested part between Turkey and Greece, so far there are no findings. However, that doesn't change the situation, because obviously no government, either a Turkish government or the Greek government, would want to foreclose a future for itself where potentially next week or several years down the road there might be some significant findings in that part of the Eastern Med. So I think energy, one more time, has come to complicate the political negotiations over how do you share that part of the Eastern Mediterranean. And then you have a third geography which is different, which is the Aegean, where in the past we have also seen a similar crisis between Turkey and Greece, dealing with the continental shelf, where each side was trying to explore for hydrocarbon resources. So overall, when I take a step back, I think I can credibly argue that despite its potential for accelerating peace, prosperity, and understanding, energy so far has played rather a detrimental role in terms of the political divisions of this geography that's so dear to us. Now, can that change? Yes, it could change, because there's no reason, theoretically at least, to think that we cannot revert our positions and look at how energy can actually become a positive catalyst for a settlement. And incidentally, there are a few options out there that I think is certainly worth discussing about how that can be. The first one is the condominium sort of solution to Cyprus, where essentially the two sides basically agree to disagree on the political context, which certainly seems to be the direction that we're traveling with, but nonetheless, they agree on the joint commercialization and distribution of revenues from the offshore resources. This is something that is not, is on the table. It's not worded as such, as a condominium, but nonetheless, as far as I understand, the Turkish Cypriot offer is quite close to what I express here. The Greek Cypriots, however, fear that such an arrangement could imply a tacit recognition of the Turkish Cypriot entity, and therefore these discussions have not gone too far in terms of reaching a settlement. But nonetheless, this is in practice, for instance, how energy could play a positive role in accelerating a solution. And I think we can extrapolate from that and basically argue that such a solution should also be part of the diplomatic efforts between Turkey and Greece. Because ultimately, if Turkey and Greece cannot agree on how they are going to share the maritime resources, how they are going to address their divisions regarding the continental shelf, they could potentially agree on the fact that they can share the resources, the hydrocarbon resources that are not there today, but maybe in the future there might be some. So the condominium principle, the joint operation and commercialization of whatever hydrocarbon resources might be there, could offer a way out to the current stalemate that we are witnessing. And there, of course, we come to the issue of, well, what's going to be the exact geographical scope of this understanding? Whether, for instance, the Aegean could also be part of this understanding. where we do have these rather difficult, thorny problems between Turkey and Greece over, sovereignty issues in the Aegean. So that's basically where I want to end, given our time constraint, is to say that so far energy has, perhaps against many of our expectations, have not played a positive role in accelerating a settlement. But nonetheless, when you talk about, the prospects for the near future, that there can be a diplomatic option available to either, the communities in Cyprus or between Turkey and Greece to creatively use energy in order to diffuse tension and basically sideline their political differences and basically leverage the economic benefits, even in the absence of a political solution.
Thank you very much, Sinan, for your very interesting presentation. Let me also welcome you all to this event on behalf of ELIAMEP, the Hellenic Foundation of European and Foreign Policy. It's a great pleasure and to work together with Ipek and the Columbia Global Center in Istanbul. I would like to make a brief remark to what Sinan said, and I would like to agree that a couple of years ago, like in 2014-15, there was quite strong hope about the possibility of energy to act as a catalyst for conflict resolution in Cyprus, because many considered that energy could contribute to footing the bill of reconciliation in Cyprus. Any resolution of the Cyprus question would require quite significant funds so that it is sustainable. And the hope was that if the discussions between the parties were heading towards a solution, at least the financial part could be alleviated by these discoveries. Unfortunately, sovereignty and the political concerns proved too strong to be reconsidered, and energy became another amplifier of the already existing disputes, as Sinan highlighted. I would just like to add a point on what Sinan said on the Greek-Turkish dispute in the Mediterranean. I think a very important changer was the signature of this agreement between Libya and Turkey. In other words, the existence of a government in Libya willing to fully endorse the Turkish position on the delimitation of maritime zone in the Eastern Mediterranean, which put the Greek government into a position of having to respond in a more proactive way, which is what we've been following in the last year, I think. So now the floor goes to Dr. Ellinas, who has been a leading expert on Cyprus energy issues and the hydrocarbons development, but he also can give us the dimension of sustainability and the environmental part of this debate, because this is something that has been remarkably absent in all discussions, and this is something that has been going throughout the history of Greek-Turkish disputes on the delimitation of maritime zones in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. There was very limited discussion about the positive negative effects of this monetization on the environment and whether there are other opportunities of cooperation beyond hydrocarbons. So, Charles, the floor is yours. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I'm a little bit concerned that I thought the webinar was going to be about climate change and other issues and not about the perennial problem of maritime disputes. However, I will concentrate my presentation on climate change, environmental and sustainability dimensions of EastMed energy. But I'd like to say something about Sinan's presentation. There is also a third way. The fact that gas is no longer exportable from the EastMed to global markets. It passed its sell-by date. It no longer is commercially viable to export it to anywhere. And I will say a few things about it. So we're all fighting windmills. We're not, it's no longer, gas should no longer be an issue for disputes. Anyway, let me go into my own presentation. So COVID-19 has, I'll give you some global highlights first. COVID-19 has led to cancellation of drilling for gas in the East Med, but has also affected gas and energy developments globally. The global gas industry was in trouble due to overproduction of gas and LNG much before COVID-19. The pandemic has made it much more difficult. There has been a decisive move to clean energy due to social pressure, but also to progressively lower costs of solar and wind power. The economies of all countries around the East Med have been affected partly by COVID-19, and recovery will be challenging. Coming out of it, countries of the region should prioritize sustainable development. Let me describe some of the developments in terms of climate change and policies in the EU and the rest of the world. First of all, let me start with the EU. The EU has adopted the European Green Deal with emphasis completely on renewables and clean energy. It is also committed to net zero emissions by 2050. It is about to commit to reduce emissions by 55% by 2020. Let me just open my presentation because I need to show you a few things. So the EU has also adopted a hydrogen strategy. It's committed to environmental, social, and governance criteria, which are now central factors in measuring the sustainability of social impact of energy investments. This graph, and I will talk about it later on, shows the impact of these changes. Basically, you cannot achieve a 55% cut in emissions by burning gas. So in Europe, as a result of these changes, the use of gas is going to go down dramatically. And these are scenarios presented by the European Commission. But this is the blue is gas, the natural gas, and that's how much it was burning in 2015. By 2030, it will go down by 20%. And by 2050, the use of gas in Europe will go down by 75 to 85%. In addition to all of these things, recently the European Ombudsman criticized the criteria EU uses to assess natural gas projects. These criteria are now being revised to include climate change and sustainability that will make funding of natural gas projects by the EU and its institutions much more difficult in the future. So no pipelines going from the East Med to Europe, either through the Mediterranean or through Turkey or through anywhere. They are no longer needed. Within the US, the election of Joe Biden as the next president will bring major changes to the global clean energy sector, placing climate at the heart of his energy policy. Priority to bring the US back into the Paris Agreement, it will be top, but will also police its implementation. So United States will get heavily involved in ensuring that the Paris Agreement succeeds. Biden is also committed to eliminate carbon emissions from the power sector in the US by 2035, and possibly also join the net zero by 2050 club by next year. He will revamp the US energy industry, putting climate change-driven policies at the center of it. This may have a far-reaching impact on US oil and gas industry, may also bring the US back into the Iran nuclear agreement, committed to so Biden is committed to fully integrate climate change into US foreign and national security policies. John Kerry has been named as his climate czar, and that is going to have far-reaching implications. In terms of the American policy towards the East Med, I can assure you that oil and gas will no longer be driving factors in that policy. There is what I call the net zero by 2050 club. In addition to the European Union, other major gas importers have committed to net zero, and these are Japan and South Korea. China has committed to net zero by 2060. The United States under Biden, as I said, may also join by next year. According to the United Nations, 22 countries have joined the club, with most of the biggest natural gas consumers in the world committing to net zero. Combined with low cost of solar and wind power, it will impact the future of gas demand globally. The global markets, so as a result of that, for example, studies by the BP, in the BP World Energy Outlook this year, show that if a net zero policy is implemented everywhere, the use of gas will peak fairly soon and will start going down. There was also, as I said, there was a glut of LNG in the global markets in 2019 that kept prices low, kept gas prices low. Competition with renewables is also a major and increasing factor. The impact of COVID-19 has been devastating on the global economy and energy demand, and the oil price collapse, and this brought gas and LNG prices to very low levels. And yet more LNG is coming into the market, with demand not catching up. As you can see from here, this is a graph produced by Bloomberg and the International Energy Agency. The forecast demand for LNG is the red line, and this is the supply of LNG coming into the markets. And this line here does not take into account the new commitments by South Korea, by Japan, and China for net zero emissions. Even without that, there is going to be an excess of LNG into the markets, and that means prices will stay low for the longer term. In the meanwhile, the international oil companies are in a state of crisis. The results so far in 2020 show massive losses. And the IOCs have announced major cuts in spending and staff cuts in 2021 and more in 2020 and more in 2021. And these are affecting their spending as far as 2025. In fact, they are also restructuring and consolidating as a result of these losses. Between 2019 and 2020, the international oil companies announced over 80 billion asset write-downs due to the shift away from oil and gas and low prices. And in addition to that, the European major companies like BP, Shell, Eni, Total are transiting to renewables. They're committing, for example, BP is committing that by 2030, 40% of its business will be renewables. That means 40% less oil and gas. With Europe in the lead, let me just show you here the low prices I talked about. They're at $5 per million BTU per unit. It's not possible to export EastMed gas to these markets. Prices must exceed $8 per million BTU to be able to export EastMed gas to global markets. The world with Europe in the lead is steadily but surely going greener. The EU's Green Deal will start impacting gas demand by mid-2020s. Europe has all the gas it needs and does not need any more large import pipelines, and certainly does not need EastMed gas. In fact, EastMed gas is becoming non-exportable because of the reasons I explained. EastMed countries have abundant renewable resources. The energy future of EastMed countries should rest on maximizing the development of renewables and exploiting gas resources regionally as a backup to renewables. This requires a resolution of regional problems, and the EU could become a catalyst to achieve this. As far as the EastMed energy future, post-COVID-19, with exports to global markets becoming difficult, the EastMed should take a more realistic view of the future of gas and global exports, and this could help diffuse conflicts. The region needs a new energy model, maximizing use of increasingly cheaper renewables. Electrical grids work better and more efficiently through interconnectivity. This could encourage regional cooperation. It could also help the countries of the region achieve their climate change goals and bring energy prices down. For EastMed gas, the future is local and regional energy markets with emphasis on renewables. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles, for this very interesting presentation. If I can combine the two presentations, I can maybe argue that the opportunity for the gas was really lost in 2014 or 2015, when then it would be possible to have a sort of a viable project that could transport the natural gas to Europe. As Charles argued, now the gas may be interesting on a regional and local level, but it is renewable energy, the future, not only for Europe and the Gulf, but for the Eastern Mediterranean as well. So we may be discussing then a different question. So how can Greece, Turkey, and the other, Cyprus and the other EastMed partners, EastMed countries, work together in order to maximize benefits from cooperation on mutual exploitation of the renewables potential of the region? So I will pass the floor now to Dr. Saygın, who is an expert exactly on this. So we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, but also to be able to comment on this very crucial topic, which very much links with the energy strategies and the transition trend Turkey is following in the past few years. I've noted down a few keywords from the previous excellent interventions, namely the cooperation aspect, the cost competitiveness, and climate and sustainability. And I'll try to build on these keywords along with the transition strategies of Turkey and why gas matters and how that fits. Of course, we know to a large extent why gas is so important, local gas. It's the main underlying question of Turkey's energy strategy lies on reducing current account deficit, which is largely made up of energy imports. And within the total energy import, gas imports are having a significant share. However, what we see now at the moment in Turkey's energy sector developments, a very rapid renewable energy uptake in the power sector, a big emphasis on the local use of energy efficiency resources, which also define core of Turkey's energy strategy, which are also overlapping with the global energy transition paradigm we are seeing. So the question for me is, what's the role of gas in this equation? And actually, as SHURA Energy Transition Center, we tabled a paper at the beginning of September, when the first large local gas reserve in the Black Sea was announced, and we tried to put that in perspective of that Turkey energy strategy and transition discussion. Now, the total energy import volume of Turkey is about $40 billion, where depending on the year and how you value that gas, it is a share of around a quarter to 35% within that total. And if you look at how gas is supplied to Turkey, 70% comes from pipelines and 30% from LNG sources. And we see now the significant changes on the LNG market. And that is, of course, not a surprise, parallel to the oil markets. And so that's the supply side and the economic context. And what it means for Turkey is to compare now with the latest numbers of the gas reserve which was found. Of course, this is not East Mediterranean, but just to put in perspective, we talk about 1,000 times bigger reserve discovery compared to the current production level in Turkey, domestic or indigenous production. So that's why it matters this much local gas. And it's more than 100 times of Turkey's any discovered reserves before August 2020, what was found in Black Sea. So just to put this on the table to show the scale. So reserve is this, the supply is on this side, and to be able to understand the role of gas in this transition speed Turkey has started taking in the past few years, we need to understand where gas is being used. And actually, if you look at the past decade or so, the predominant focus of gas was on the power sector. Of course, that was an outcome of the liberalization that has started in the early 2000s, where lots of private sector investments have taken place on gas generators, because a good market has been foreseen back then with good price developments and a growth in electricity demand. And eventually lots of gas, about say 20 billion cubic meters per year was consumed by the power sector, the single largest user. And over time, with population growth, etc., the demand has shifted to heating and industry, manufacturing industry sectors. Today, these markets represent about more than half of all gas demand. The power sector has lost its share, and the heating sector has gained a more or a higher share in the total demand. So the question is, what happened in the power sector? Why gas is not being used as much? And actually, I think we heard that in the previous presentation, the renewables are the underlying reason for that. So there's an unseen, not experienced so far pace of renewables uptake in the entire world, and Turkey is one of those countries where this transition in the power system is happening. If you also look at the latest statistics announced for 2000, you see a significant share of especially wind and solar gaining capacity in the power market. And that is because of the cost. And that's the cost competitive question. Compared to renewables, there is no other source that is as cheap to produce electricity. And actually, we've seen the impact of changing power market dynamics over gas during the COVID period, and we've seen it also last year. If you follow the power sector discussions of Turkey, there is overcapacity of too much capacity to supply the demand in Turkey, and that was because of large investments in the past 2 decades. And during the COVID period, when the demand has gone down significantly in the first months of the pandemic, the overcapacity has been felt even more because there was no need for that much capacity. Demand was going down, and this pushed gas outside of the system more and more. So renewables are the main choice of investors at the moment, and this will be the case from a cost competitive perspective in the coming years. So gas may look like losing a significant share, but there will still be importance of that. And we discussed that in our earlier work by SHURA. The more share of wind and solar, which are characterized by intermittent or variability of their output. So depending on the resource quality they are able to produce. If there's a cloud, if the wind is not blowing, they don't produce. And that creates an imbalancing or a system problem in the power sector. And gas as a flexible source can provide a big solution to that. So there's an important synergy between the two. A few words on the heating sector. There is already a big importance of gas infrastructure for buildings heating, for homes and offices, obviously. And at the same time, Turkey has a very comprehensive and inclusive National Energy Efficiency Action Plan. The more efficient our energy system will be, the less demand there will be also for gas. So we also need to think of that. And especially, it was mentioned a few minutes ago in the context of the European Green Deal, which is a climate neutral, but an industry competitiveness strategy of the EU, which actually goes beyond its borders for its exporting neighbors to the EU to also transition their energy system. And EU being the largest trade partner of Turkey, by accounting for more than half of all Turkey's exports, is now putting a sudden agenda on the industry's decarbonization. Before, this discussion was known, but there was not the push for accelerating it. Now, industry of Turkey, to maintain competitiveness and its export power, will now need to decarbonize itself with more efficiency, renewables, and also alternatives to fossil fuels. So here, this is actually a very important area for cooperation between the EU region and Turkey. And also, as for imported gas, to find alternatives like local gas, there will also be important alternatives like green hydrogen, which can create synergies with local gas. So to extend its use and to make it used in a more sustainable and continued way. This is also another area for cooperation. And if we will, as Turkey, use more and more our local gas resources rightly to reduce our import costs, renewables and energy efficiency make a very complementary approach to that, to make their use of local gas reserves longer for more years. So this strategy is crucial. There is a need for planning for this, how we will utilize these local resources at the most competitive way with our transition strategy of Turkey that we've already started being part of globally, and also how we can identify new ways of cooperation on issues that define the transition. So I'll stop here, and of course happy to answer any questions, but also contribute later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deger, for your very interesting intervention. Let me make a point which I think is important to raise. It is clear that renewables and wind power is taking on in the region, and there's certainly a very important potential there. But I would like to share some concerns raised by at least some environmental groups in Greece that, while not being against, in principle, the wind power, the way that wind parks are designed, or the sort of its effect on the natural environment, has raised reasons for many concerns. So, for example, there have been some Greek projects developing wind power parks in mountains, in protected areas, or in some of the smaller Aegean islands. So in that respect, developing a regulatory framework so that sustainability also refers to the development of wind power, I think is extremely important. So I will now move to the Q&A session, and I will start reading questions that our followers are sending to us. The first question I have is for Charles Ellinas. President-elect Joe Biden is committed to the Paris Agreement, as you mentioned, and he supports a net zero by 2050 target. We also know the European and Chinese pledges. As the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement is approaching, we know from the Trump administration that these commitments by countries are in fact vulnerable to changing political government and calculations. So what does this tell us for the future of the issue, as we all know that we need long-lasting policies that should survive changing political currents in the US and elsewhere?
Let me start with the US. Despite Trump, there is a huge commitment to renewables in the US already. More than half of the states have committed to various reductions in carbon emissions, to increasing renewables and so on. And actually renewables in the United States, the use of renewables is increasing rapidly, based purely on commercial reasons, because they're cheap. And the combination now of renewables and batteries is overcoming, to a certain extent, the intermittency. Now, the next year, we're going to have COP26 in Glasgow. COP26 will be the serious follow-up after Paris. And that is where I believe, with Biden in the lead, and Biden appointing Senator Kerry as his environmental czar, they will take the lead there and work with the Chinese and Europe to introduce a lasting new agreement, an update on the Paris Agreement, with more ambitious targets, more commitments. And if that happens, the same way as Paris Agreement, once it was put in place, it achieved a life of its own, we're going to have the same situation after COP26, a new global agreement supported by the global superpowers, basically Europe, the United States, and China, and others, that will take effect. And I believe that will make the switch from fossil fuels to renewables irreversible globally. And the EU is also, based on what Deger said before, with this carbon tax, will influence what is happening everywhere around them. Anybody that wants to have a commercial relationship with the EU will have to supply products with low carbon emissions. So these changes are irreversible. The major oil companies are committing to these things. As I said before, all of the European companies have now committed to net zero by 2050 on their products and everything. They are reducing their oil and gas production already, and they're increasing their renewables. The whole world is going one way. We in the EastMed, to a certain extent, have remained fossilized. We remain in the past, pre-2014. We haven't changed our views. In fact, I was listening to an economist webinar last week on the EastMed, and it's incredible how the politicians of the region are stuck to that period and they can't see forward. The future, I'm afraid, and I am an oil and gas engineer, so I should be supporting oil and gas. It's not a case of supporting it. The future is going away. It's going towards renewables, and nobody can stop it, even if there is a change of president in the United States in 4 years' time.
Thank you very much. A question on Sinan. What are policy routes that are open and available to promote cooperation between the EastMed countries?
Well, right now this cooperation is botched because of the political divisions. There is certainly already, in place a gas forum which excludes Turkey. So there's a degree of cooperation which incidentally excludes Turkey. But there is now an offer on the table of convening a multilateral conference about the EastMed, which would include Turkey and all the relevant states. This sounds nice in theory, but of course, in practice, as long as you can't tackle these political differences and you can't diffuse these tensions, this type of atmospherics will necessarily also impact whatever is going to be discussed in that multilateral conference, whether it's energy, trade, or any other basket. So I think it's naive to think that we can actually talk about concrete multilateral policy initiatives without tackling the core problems which are, deeply political in nature. So my hope really is that, given that there's a basket of differences between Turkey and Greece, that those two countries can come to an agreement to start their bilateral negotiations. These can lead a political solution for some areas. If it can't, they could also agree to take their differences to an international court. So that would at least diffuse the tension. And on the eastern part of Eastern Med, about Cyprus, really right now, to be realistic, I only see talks about, you know, what I said was a condominium formula, but essentially how the two sides can agree on, you know, on sharing the revenues from these offshore resources, while disagreeing on the conditions for a political settlement, because on that last one, I've sort of lost hope.
Thank you very much. There is another question from Professor Achilles Kanelopoulos. What do the panelists think about the combination of East Med natural gas using FPSUs for blue liquid hydrogen? So it's a more technical question for those of you who are experts.
I'm not an expert, but I can try to answer.
Yes.
Of course, I mean, I brought up the topic of hydrogen, and maybe that's why I should just add a few things there. The hydrogen is not a new energy carrier. It's been produced for decades now and used by different sectors. The conventional hydrogen is typically fossil fuel, but when it goes to blue and green, then you talk about other ways of producing it. And the green hydrogen, which I was referring to because of the significant resource availability of renewables in Turkey, and to produce that hydrogen and export that to other countries after domestic consumption, is one way of potential area which can bring the EU region with Turkey. When it comes to the blue hydrogen, of course, then we start talking about using gas, but then what do we do with the carbon dioxide that will be emitted while we produce that hydrogen? And it's typically being discussed to capture it and store it underground, which then raises the question, do you have enough space for it underground? Where will you do it in a safe way? And what will be the costs of that? So it brings additional questions that need to be answered. It's not as straightforward as producing from renewables, but of course, this is an area which many countries are also looking into. And it needs its own research, I must say. However, from a technical perspective and the cost perspective, the storage issue needs to be resolved. That's something I could add on it.
Thank you very much. Next question from Mr. Mustafa Cem Alfar is more Turkey oriented. The question, having in mind the new reserves discovered in the Black Sea, what should be the policy of Turkey in 2021 regarding renewing the existing gas supply agreements with Russia, Iran, and Azerbaijan? So maybe Sinan or Deger would like to comment.
Well, perhaps Deger might have something to say on this, but from my perspective, you know, the gas findings in the Black Sea region are fine, but it will still take 7 to 10 years before they can be, commercially exploitable. We don't know today to what extent the reserves are going to be commercially exploitable. There are obvious technical difficulties for getting the gas out from those depths. It doesn't mean that it can't be done. It surely can be. But those costs have to be taken into consideration, and that you need to compare to what the gas price shall be in 7 to 10 years down the road. And there, the expectations because of also the Green Deal, that gas prices will come down. And therefore, we don't really know how much of those resources will be commercially available. Which means that Turkey will need to re-engage in long-term negotiations with its suppliers, Azerbaijan and Russia, without being able to fully understand and be confident about how much of that potential supply it can replace through its gas findings in the Black Sea. If everything turns out well, maybe the share will be higher, but perhaps for the reasons that I've tried to mention, the share might be lower. And therefore, the government has to sort of err on the side of, conservatism. Therefore, as a result, I don't think that this finding will have a big impact on these, negotiations for long-term supply.
Maybe just to add to that, Turkey obviously would rightly use this for negotiation power, but also we need to be able to gain that negotiation. We also need a long-term planning of how we will use that gas and to which extent. Without understanding of those, alongside the cost and technical issues, how long are we going to utilize in which markets? The basis will not be fulfilled entirely. So all the current energy strategy target of Turkey is until 2023, which is fine, but that year we are approaching very fast. And we need to look beyond that. And that also applies for gas reserves and any other sector. And we need this long-term view to be able to come back to the point of discussions with other countries.
Thank you very much. There is a question on the diplomacy side of our webinar by Ms. Madeleine Mezagopian. She's asking, what is the future of military force geopolitical solutions by Turkey, starting with the underlying agreement between Turkey and Libya? So, Sinan, would you like to comment on this?
Well, I think there might be a slight misunderstanding about what Turkey wants to achieve through hard power politics. The objective, as far as I can understand, of Turkish foreign policy, even with its reliance on hard power tactics, is not to impose a military solution anywhere. It is to change the context, either to force negotiations or to demonstrate to the alliance that is now become increasingly anti-Turkey, that they cannot hope to pressure Turkey politically to achieve their aims. I think Libya should also be viewed in that context. The agreement between Turkey and Libya may not survive at the end of the day once we enter negotiations with Greece. But nonetheless, it has been a useful tool to basically convince, I think, Greek authorities that the only solution is through bilateral negotiations with Turkey, because otherwise, the situation is becoming more tense. Turkey has a new ally in Northern Africa with Libya backing the Turkish version of how the continental shelf should be divided. So in that sense, it has been a useful diplomatic tool. But I don't think that it's the ultimate end state in terms of what Turkey aims to accomplish.
Thank you very much. As we're coming close to the end of the event, I will give the last question to Ipek. So, Ipek, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that privilege. I just wanted to ask, we talked about, of course, pricing and commercial priorities, demand, and also policy making and political priorities. When we look to renewables, there's also the generational difference, the sensitivity on climate change, and also the role of civil society. Do you see that coming into play in the East Mediterranean, in our region, in Greece, in Turkey, in other places, and that playing a role, more of a role going forward and impacting policy decisions? This is for the panel, so whoever would like to take it. Sinan, Charles, maybe all
I can say a few words. In the region, I'm afraid, what will drive the future form of energy use is commercial, apart from the politics, which I leave aside, is commercial factors. Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, right now, the countries, Greece is moving quite strongly towards renewables because it's all like Turkey is also importing all of its energy, and has abundance of wind and solar. And despite the fact that wind is a problem, solar energy is possible. But it is also receiving huge support from the European Union. So, for example, out of this recovery fund, Greece may receive as much as 32 billion euros, a third of which must be spent on renewables. So that is driving Greece in that direction. Egypt is doing something similar. It's investing heavily in renewables. And in fact, it's fast becoming the leader of renewables in Africa. Again, because of its rising population, its increasing need of energy and costs. So it's costs that is driving that. The Egyptians don't care very much as to where their energy is coming from, provided it's cheap. So it is, I'm afraid, economic reasons that would lead to the increasing use of renewables. And with solar, and especially solar and wind coming down in costs, there is no question that eventually they will take over in terms of power generation, at least. Gas is not going to come down significantly in cost. In fact, if anything, is going to cost more because we are discovering it in more difficult places. The EastMed gas is in 2,000 meters. The new discovery by Turkey in the Black Sea is equally deep. So it's always going to be expensive. Renewables are cheaper, with batteries coming up to scratch, and combining renewables with batteries and overcoming, to a large extent, intermittency will mean that the countries of the region increasingly will turn to renewables. And there is on top the peer pressure from the rest of the world to do exactly that, to reduce emissions and move to renewables.
Maybe just to add on that, what makes this energy transition, which we live at the moment in all countries and including in Turkey, and what makes it different compared to all the transitions we had, is the involvement of the citizen. It's a consumer-driven and it's a consumer-centric transition. It's no longer this typical centralized energy system we talk about. We are talking about more decentralized. So smaller systems, you have a rooftop PV, you have an electric vehicle which you want to charge your electric vehicle by yourself with the electricity you produce. People are becoming more aware of this. The average citizen during the COVID period learned about the crude oil prices by heart. And that change is also being driven by the cost of renewables. We all know in Turkey how much these costs are evolving, what we can gain as a benefit from that. And it's also in a country like Turkey, which is highly urbanized, the citizens getting impacted by the air pollution. And they know more and more the solutions to avoid that is energy efficiency and a cleaner environment enabled by cleaner energy carriers producing our electricity, heating, and so on. So in these regards, the transition we talk about is more civil society pushed. It's more pushed by the average citizen. Of course, the two pillars are, again, the businesses and the public sector, our policymakers, but the consumers are more involved. So that's something we see quite a bit in other countries, but also in Turkey, of course.
So I guess this answer brings us to the end of the event. Thank you very much, Charles, Sinan, and Deger, for your very interesting presentations. I would like to thank very much those who decided to attend this event today, our followers on the web. And I would like to thank very much on behalf of ELIAMEP Colombia Global Center Istanbul, Ipek, and Merve for collaborating in this event. So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you again in another event. Have a great evening.